Analyzing Gwen Stacy. In this section, we are going to recognize the different elements that make up different characters of series or movies so that you know how to draw them. Continuing with the theme of Spider-Man across the Spiderverse, today we're going to analyze a completely different character from Miles Morales. If you didn't see the video, watch it here. Today we analyze Gwen Stacy. Let's start by looking at her proportions, in which we see that she has quite normal proportions for an adult. In this case, we see that they are 7.5 heads. However, you can notice that her trunk and head are very similar in size to her legs, this being a little longer. Now, let's look at her face. The first thing to note is that we draw her skull with a circle, as we would normally do with a regular human face. For her jaw, we're going to draw a line from the line of her hair with a soft inclination to the end of the circle. From there, we increase the inclination to her chin that is flat. I divided her face into small sections of 5 spaces, on the hairline, on the base of her eyebrows, on her nose, and from there to the chin. We're going to see very normal proportions for a face of 1 by 1 by 1, as expected for an adult human face without stylization. We're going to notice how especially both her nose and her mouth are composed by mainly rounded lines. I want to start with the guides that I find in her eyes, nose, and eyebrows that are always closely linked. The inner part of her eyes points directly to the base of her nose. The lower part of her eyes points to the center of them, which is 1.5 spaces high. The upper and lower lines are horizontally straight. The upper line goes down gently to the outer corner, and the low line goes up at a straighter angle, as always pointing to the outer part of her eyebrows. These lines are joined a little above the center of her angle, while in the inner part they are joined very closely to the base with a small vertical line to form the lacrimal. From her eye to her eyebrow there is a half space, and her eyelid is halfway to a quarter of a space. A line goes from the lacrimal to her eyebrows. This will help us define the shading. And curiously, another line crosses from the corner of her eyebrows, passing through the upper inner corner of her eye to the beginning of the outer curve in the lower part. Coincidence? I doubt it. Her iris is somewhat oval horizontally, and in this reference it is larger than the opening of her eyelid, so both the upper and lower parts are hidden. Her eyebrows on the inside are half a space from the lacrimal. Their width is 4 1/4 of spaces. Their height is 1/3 of a space in the inner part and 2/3 in the highest part. On the outside it goes down half a space. We can also see the lines that form the space in between the eyebrows. Her nose is 3 spaces in the widest part below and 1 space in the thinnest part. In between the eyebrows we see 2 spaces. The whole of her nose is shaped like a pear or vessel that is not completely symmetrical. Her nostrils are a single curve. There are no clear angles in it, but instead we see very soft curvatures. Towards her mouth, we can notice that there are no very pronounced and angular elevations as we see in Miles' face. But by the shading it is possible to notice them. First, the upper lip is separated from her nose by a space. We see that it is 0.5 spaces wide. The lower lip is 0.9 and her mouth width is 4 spaces. Although it is not so visible, we can see the lines that make up the whole area around her lips. Following the lines that come from her nose, an octagon shape is created. We see 3 surfaces from her nose to the upper lip, and we also see 3 surfaces from her chin to the lower lip. Her lips are a very rounded hexagon shape. The opening of her mouth is a simple curve. We see that the upper lip does not end completely pointed, but we see a small line to the side. We see mainly flat surfaces all around her face, which you can see here in violet, mainly squared and triangular shapes. Those shapes give us a very clear clue of the areas that we should shade on her face. Her ears go from the line of her eyebrows to her nose, considering the perspective, of course. They don't stand out much, and they are drawn with 6 semi-straight lines, with a small tip at the top. Her neck starts from her ear with a soft curvature to her shoulders. Her hair is a little wavy. On her left side, it is short and much longer on the right side. A recommendation when drawing hair is to think of it as several groups, some bigger and others smaller. Avoid drawing many lines. When coloring, we will take into account the directionality. That is, we will do the coloring following the direction of the strands. Keep in mind that some strands can be very visible in some parts and then almost melt with the rest of the hair. In the end, we will be able to draw some individual hairs, only if necessary. For now, I'm going to keep these two strands that can be the part of her hair that looks the most complex when it comes to drawing. We see how the first one passes through the front and then turns to pass behind the second. What can make it look a little complicated is that first we see its outer part and then we see its inner part and a small edge. The second is made up of 3 soft curves. This one starts below the first one and ends in the front. Now we will look at her face in a 3/4 position. This analysis should be faster because we're mainly going to look at how the different perspective causes some shapes and sizes to change. I drew her skull with a horizontally elongated oval. We can see again the proportion of her face that is divided into 3 almost equal parts. The line from her eyebrows along with the line of her ears shows us an important intersection. From this intersection we see the line of her jaw, which has a triangular shape with somewhat curved lines. We see how the center line on the front of her face curves entering toward the eyes and protruding towards her forehead and her mouth. The circle around the intersection of the side of her face and the line that goes from there towards her chin show us a mostly flat area on her face. Let's look at how together her eyes, nose and mouth share lines that make everything a unit and not just separate parts. At this point, it is important to consider the perspective that makes the farthest part look smaller and narrower in addition to changing the angle of the line. The line that defines her eyebrows passes through the lower part of her eyebrow to the inner part of her cheekbone, going down her mouth and from there to her chin. We also see how the line of her eyebrows goes down to her nose and enters the inner corner of her eye. We see the relief that comes out from the eye to the side of her nose and the inner part of the eyelid, which creates this area of shadow that goes down her nose. From her eyebrow, the line of her nose enters in line with her upper eyelids and comes out again. We see that the tip of her nose is rounded. In her eyes, the outer line of her left eye tilts to merge with the upper one, while the inner one is almost vertical. We see something similar in the right eye. Already in her mouth, we see the 6 surfaces of the skin part of the lips. Since these sections stand out, they almost don't let you see the spaces on the right side. This section also protrudes towards her chin. Here we can see the main surfaces that are created on the front of her face and the large surface that is created on the point where her face turns to the side. In the side view, we will start by looking at her skull, which is a slightly elongated oval horizontally. A triangle that descends from the front line of her skull points toward her chin. We see again the approximate ratio of 1 by 1 by 1. Again, following the line of her ear, we also find the line of her jaw that goes down a little and then curves to go towards her chin. A smaller oval inside the larger oval shows us the flat area on her skull. The line that goes down from the intersection on the side of her head shows the flat area from here to her chin and jaw. The front line of her face and her double chin form an angle of about 90 degrees. Here I marked where the curvature of her neck should be and where it should join the skull. Her eye is a curved triangle, and we see how the front of her eyelids curve to reach the lacrimal on the hidden side. From there, the guideline of her eyebrow and cheekbone to her upper lip comes out in a practically continuous curve. The lower part of her eye points to the outer side of her eyebrow. From there, The guideline of her eyebrow and cheekbone to her upper lip comes out in a practically continuous curve. The lower part of her eye points to the outer side of her eyebrow. We see all the shading under her eye and the side of the lower part of her nose as a set that follows these very clearly defined guidelines. On her lips, we see triangular shapes on the side section and a more square shape in the center. And we don't see the sections on the other side. These lines also show us where there is a change of direction on her lips. The shading on the side of her face shows us quite clearly the guideline where her face turns from the front to the side. I was able to form her ear with 4 semi-straight lines for the outer part, a question mark shape for the inner part, and another quite square curve in the inner part, formed with 3 semi-straight lines. Something to note here is that the inner and outer line are almost a single line, and the innermost line also connects with the outer line. With this, we end the analysis of Gwen Stacy's face from the movie Spiderman Across the Spiderverse. I hope it will be useful to you and that you will be encouraged to draw these characters. Remember that there is also an analysis of Miles Morales' face. If you like this analysis, I ask you to help me with a like, and if you want to help even more, you could subscribe to the channel and send it to someone who may find this content useful. See you in the next video. Adiós.